We both serve on the Christian-Jewish Dialogue of Montreal, and at the time I was president of that organization, and a group of us were looking at the potential of this law being proposed by the current government. And so we decided that it would be good to bring together people from different religious communities to talk about what kind of impact this law would have on all of us. And out of that, our first really big meeting, we had about 50 people who showed up just to have a conversation. And at that time, we just knew there might be a bill. We didn't know what all the parameters would be. We had some pretty good idea of what it might be, and that they would probably be using the notwithstanding clause to pass it. And out of that, we had groups of people who came forward interested in working on this together. And one of the people we met was Azim Hussein, who is who's really the lead lawyer on the case. And we started discussing what would be some of our legal options. And out of that, we actually filed this case. And as a result, once the law was presented, once the bill was presented, and then once the law was put into effect.
Thank you. So you guys have been very busy, I guess, but also you've been preparing for when this actually became a law. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. We've been looking at both, what were the legal concerns and also what was the public opinion as response, what would that be, and where would we have room to try and make some changes and try to protect people who were going to be most affected by this law.
So thank you for explaining. When did you formally file a complaint?
Oh, that's such a great question. I'm trying to remember when was the exact date. Catherine, do you remember? I have to go look it up to give you the exact date. I can look that up for you after this conversation to give you the exact date. It's just everything is kind of blurred together, especially with COVID. Who remembers anything? But it's been a good year now that we've been in this process.
The case most certainly was filed in the fall of 2019. But if you want an exact date, that's another story. But the law came into effect, if I remember correctly, like the spring, May, June,
right,
2019, and then the court cases began in the fall. Or at least our court case began in the fall.
Do you believe that the government has the right to uphold Law 21?
From our perspective, this is a solution-looking problem. So there is no problem. There has been no problem other than an expression of discomfort specifically with Muslim women wearing the hijab. And the government, in an attempt to try and come across as neutral, expanded it to cover everybody wearing religious symbols that were obvious. And so this is taking away the right for individual expression, the right for religious expression, the right for a right of conscience. So no, the answer to that question is no.
I think your question is maybe the wrong question. Does the government have the right to uphold the law? I think the government actually has a responsibility to uphold the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. That's their responsibility as a government, is to ensure that all people's charter rights are protected. And I think that's the most important question here is the government actually upholding its responsibility to protect the charter rights of all the Quebec citizens who they are mandated to serve?
Very well said. Thank you so much. So I know that I'm kind of getting into legal things a little bit more, maybe kind of the difficult questions. But is it possible you could touch on the notwithstanding clause, and how does Law 21 utilize this clause to surpass the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms?
me unmute. So there is in both charters, both the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms as well as the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, this clause which gives a province the right to override some of those protected rights and freedoms. But what we consider the use of that clause to be invalid because it's not consistent with with the values of a free and democratic society. And, there has to be a limit to the majority's ability to deprive minorities of their rights and freedoms. And so what the government did was to say, we're passing this law, even though it takes away specific rights and freedoms that are guaranteed by our charter. And so that is, it just becomes the tyranny of the majority or ultimately threatens all minority rights when you do that. And the question is, when you start to take away some rights, what happens? What is the limit? When do you say, no, we can't, there are certain things that are just basic, as Catherine put it, that we have a basic responsibility to uphold people's human rights.
Thank you.
Does that, do you need more information about that or?
No, I think that's great. I mean, this issue is so deep. I feel like there's so much endless things to say on it. But no, I think your answer is great. And what do you think of the federal government's response?
I think that the federal government can stand up and say that there are basic rights and that have to be upheld. And so, that is certainly what we hope the federal government will do, and that the courts have a right to decide on certain issues. And what the Quebec government did was to say, we're not going to let the courts weigh in on this issue. We're going to just take that right away. And that's usually a guaranteed right that we have to say, that we can go to the court and say, this is not just, this is not fair, and let the court decide. And what the government did was say, court is supposed to be impartial, but we're not even going to let an impartial body take a look at this and say, is this fair or not?
Thank you.
I might just add that I think it's so powerful that both the Quebec and the federal government have enshrined rights in a charter. I think it's amazing that the government thought that was so important that they identified and wrote out and made a foundation for our society to run on, that we accept that we all have rights and that we want to live together based on these rights and freedoms. And I think it's really important that governments remind citizens and also remember in their own work the importance of these rights and freedoms, and that it's really the foundational blocks of our communities, these rights and freedoms. So you asked about the government's, how the government's responding. I would say I just love to see the government remind us of that and to make that the focus, that we respect each other in our communities and that we want to uphold each other's rights and freedoms.
Thank you.
And our the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms was passed, long before the Canadian Charter, and was something that was supported by René Lévesque. It has more expansive protections than any other charter in North America in terms of human rights and economic freedoms, and it's something that we should be so proud of. And to turn around and override this incredible document is just so disappointing. It's such an important thing that Quebec has done, that the people of Quebec have done for each other, and to turn our back on it now is just such a shame.
Thank you very much. When we spoke on the phone yesterday, you were talking a little bit about, um, you know, if um, if the court votes in favor of this of Law 21, it will be something that hasn't happened in 50 years. Could you speak a little bit more on this?
So, not quite. That's not what I quite said. So, there has not been a case like this since probably the 1950s. There was a case, the Roncorelli case, which specifically focused on what kind of rights does a province have to take away people's religious freedom. And this is a case again where we're looking at that, and but the level of the use of the notwithstanding clause, the question of how much can a province take away from people in terms of their human rights, this is unprecedented. And so, no matter what is decided in this case, it's going to be a constitutional case. And so, what happens now is that we're waiting for the Superior Court to the judge, Marc-André Blanchard, to make his final decision, his final judgment. And whether he finds in favor of us, of those who are opposing the law, or whether it finds in favor of the Quebec government, either way, either party is going to appeal. And that means that it would then go to the Court of Appeal. And then after the Court of Appeal, depending on who wins or who loses, most likely it's pretty much expected that the next thing would be to ask for a judgment from the Supreme Court, in other words, permission from the Supreme Court to hear the case, to hear an appeal. And then at that point, whatever if the Supreme Court decides to hear this case, which we think is most likely it would, because it is a question of public importance as to how much can a province decide that it can use the notwithstanding clause to take away basic rights that are guaranteed by our charters. And if that happens, then whatever the Supreme Court decides, it's going to make constitutional history. And this is, watching this case unfold, and we are watching constitutional history in the making, and it's going to be in the textbooks, the law textbooks, when it's all decided. This is all going to probably unfurl over, several years. This is going to take time, but we're looking at a major, major decision that is going to affect our constitutional rights.
Thank you. Kind of makes you wonder why maybe there's not greater media attention around it. I think when I was looking at the media coverage, there was a lot from 2019, but I found, unfortunately, it's fizzled out a little bit. When something happens in the court, we'll hear it again. But yeah, I guess just a personal comment.
I can respond to that in the sense that I think people who are not affected by the law are going on about, it's like they don't even notice that this law is in effect. But if you are a religious person who wears a religious symbol, who expresses themselves in certain ways, this is having a major effect on your life. And we're seeing it specifically Muslim women who are teachers, who are not able to change, they can't even change the school they work for if they've been grandfathered in. They are, or even women who are not teachers, who are not affected specifically by this law. People are telling them, oh, you wear the hijab, therefore you can't work for us, even though that's not right. But I think that it's affecting a minority, and therefore the majority has gone on along its way, not thinking about it. I don't know, Catherine, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that's correct. If you're looking for the media to be a barometer of what's going on in the community, the media generally is commenting on things that the majority are interested in and are affected by. So in a case like this, when it's minority rights and people minority groups, religious groups who don't have the same voice in the general community. I think that's the reason you're not seeing it. Not that it's not damaging and not harmful and not hurtful to a large number of people who are affected by this law, but maybe simply that it's hard to have the minority voice in the larger media. So thanks for taking an interest in the story, because I do think it's important.
Thank you very much. And it is a good point. I think unfortunately mainstream media does really reflect the public, I guess, majority opinion, but that's not accurate to our whole society.
Maybe just to reinforce what you're doing, that actually we need people in the media who are willing to stand up and raise the voice of people who are often voiceless, who often don't have the same access and the same ability to share their stories and their concerns into the larger community.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So why are you finding that Law 21 is disproportionately affecting Muslim women who do wear the hijab or the niqab?
It's because the law specifically says that you cannot wear religious symbols while you are working. And for some religious Muslim women, and even women who are not necessarily what you would categorize as being devoutly religious, but choose to wear the hijab. This is just how they choose to present themselves. This is how they feel comfortable in society. They are being told that you can't work in a job that is supported by the government. But that can mean anything from you can't teach, you can't be a lawyer, you can't be a notary, you can't work in a back office and wear a hijab. So your economic prosperity is highly affected by this law. Your ability to take care of yourself and your family is highly affected. Your ability to move from one position to another is highly affected. So there have been some people who've been grandfathered in when the law went into effect, where it said, well, if you're already working in a school, you can continue to do that. However, you can't move to another position, you can't work for another school, you can't ever become a principal of a school because you've made this decision. And what these women are saying is, this is my personal choice. This is not about me trying to convince you to become a Muslim. This is about me and how I choose to be in my world. And it's not something that I can just take off during the day and put on at home. And but it also privileges Muslim men over Muslim women. So if a Muslim man wears a beard for religious reasons, he can still work. He's not being, he's not being discriminated against in that way. But it's specifically women choosing to wear the hijab who are being targeted more than anyone else. And during the trial, it came up again and again. The other side presented arguments that all focused on Muslim women and on this idea that there should be equality between men and women, and therefore we have to remove these women's hijabs so that they are free. But what you're doing is really taking away their free choice to present themselves as they choose in society. And it's kind of like saying, you have to wear a short skirt in order to fit into Quebec society. I mean, that would be ridiculous. And yet this is what we're doing. We're saying we are liberating you by telling you what you can and cannot do, and taking away your job and taking away your economic capability, which is just so much the reverse of what, if you in terms of trying to liberate people and times of trying to create equality between men and women, taking jobs specifically away from a minority group of women is so antithetical to that idea. I'm trying to think whether there was something else I wanted to add. I'll think for a second.
And also something that I think is interesting. It's kind of interesting just to look at this case and look at all the plaintiffs on both sides of the case that I can recall. They're all women. That's really kind of telling. If this isn't a gendered issue, then why is that so prominent in the case, that the voices on both sides, the women affected who are being supported by our coalition and coming forward with their stories, all women, and the people that have come on the other side, in fact, again, all women. So what does that say about this law, that it disproportionately is affecting women?
And again, and I would say again, this is it's a solution looking for a problem. And as our plaintiffs, as they testified, they talked about how they're all teachers, the three women that we're representing. They're all teachers. They've been beloved teachers in their schools. They have never had anyone complain. One of the teachers told a story of how she ran into a child's parent on the street one day, and the parent said, "Oh, my child never mentioned that you wear the hijab." It just wasn't a thing for the child at all. And the parents, have been totally in support of these teachers. And, the idea that somehow they would be proselytizing it's not the case. And it's not a problem. And there have been no complaints to say that that's happened. So, but what we heard again and again was this discomfort with difference. And discomfort in a way that makes you decide that somehow this has to do with gender, with equality, and yet, again, you're taking away somebody's rights, somebody's human rights, and taking away, actually erasing their equality and erasing them within, trying to erase them from within society.
I think it's really important in this case that we use the word discrimination, because in the government's own charter of human rights, they explicitly say that discrimination exists where exclusion has the effect of nullifying or impairing the rights in the document. So it's kind of interesting to me that in their own words, they are discriminating against, they're nullifying and impairing the rights of people of religious people who by conscience choose to express themselves in a certain way in the community. They're discriminating against them and impairing their capacity to have the normal rights that the rest of us have, the rights to obtain services, to be hired on the condition of our capacity for employment. And I think that's interesting, important to note.
Thank you so much, the both of you, for your comments. It's very interesting to hear how all of the people, I guess, opposing the law in this court, how they're women. That's interesting. I guess something I haven't read about in news articles before. So
I don't know. I don't know if I would say that certainly in the court case there were. So there is the mouvement laïque. There is also Droit pour les femmes, and I'm trying to think who's the other group. It's the Libre Penseur Athée, and so. But so there certainly were men who came forward, fathers who came forward, mothers who came forward. So I don't, but I do think it all just continued to focus on specifically on teachers, and the effect on children. And what we would say is that, children just grow and learn so much by being exposed to diversity, and it prepares them for the very diverse world that they're going to face and inherit. And by trying to somehow create this bulle, this bubble, that they would never see anybody who expresses themselves differently, that is, that again, it's the concern, the solution that the government is proposing for a problem that doesn't exist. That somehow this is detrimental to children, when children are fine. Children need to be exposed to difference and to different ideas, and for parents to be responsible for explaining to their children why it is that their teacher is different from their families, and that's okay.
Thank you.
I should clarify, because I don't want you to take my last comment incorrectly, but this law affects men and women. So it's not a law that's written to target only women. So it's not gendered in that sense, but women, there is more women who are affected currently by what's going on that we're aware of, and more women who are willing to come forward and talk about the impact this has on their lives, on their careers, and on them personally. So
but we see lawyers, for example, who are Orthodox Jews who wear the kippah, and then they have to decide, can I go into court and wear my kippah? What do I do? And can I ever, if I choose to work in the government sector, can I do that? And the way the law is written, it says that even if you are in a back office, you could not wear your kippah. And the same thing would be for a Sikh man wearing the turban. There are also Sikh women who wear the turban. But again and again in the courts, in the arguments that were put forward, the focus was again and again really on Muslim women.
It's interesting that Quebec society has been such an opening and welcome society, and I think we need to remind the Quebec society of this, that we are a welcoming people. We welcome people from all over the world who come here and who want to live and be part of our communities. And that diversity is actually a strength. It's a strength for us. It's not something to be afraid of.
Very well put. Thank you so much. Is there anything that I didn't ask? I mean, I know that this is such a big topic. Of course, there's so much that I didn't ask that I'm going to consider and be researching, and other people I have to talk to. But I guess specifically that you would like to talk about and me to include.
I don't know. I feel like we've probably given you enough to work with. Certainly, if you have any questions about the legal specifics, let me know, and I can either answer the questions or get answers for you. You might, so I can make some suggestions of who you could talk to who are not directly engaged in the case, who might be able to talk with you about the constitutional law and what it all means. So you had asked me about the difference between the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and the Canadian Charter. And the Quebec Charter focuses specifically on Quebec and Quebec's government, but also on individuals in Quebec, whereas the Canadian Charter focuses on an overall umbrella for all provinces and for the Constitution. And so it's not focused, I mean, if you get into the legal, then it's not focused on individuals from the Canadian Charter. It's focused on the broader, on the country and on the provinces, whereas the Quebec Charter is specifically focused on the individual rights and the individuals and the government itself.
There is one thing, if you want, I'll just read out, because I think it's something maybe to contextualize who we are and why we're here. We do have a little statement that we put out at the beginning, which you probably have access to, but sometimes I think it's nice just to have it as a video clip. So if you want me to read it, or if you want Diane to read it, I think that could be interesting. Okay, I'll read it out. Then you have the clip of it if you're interested. Okay, so I'm just going to read like who we are and what our goals are. Okay, so Coalition Inclusion Quebec is a coalition of religious and non-religious people and community organizations. Its members have come together to say no to discrimination embedded in Law 21 and to uphold the rights of all Quebec citizens. The coalition's symbol is a white circle, representing a circle of inclusion for every single person in Quebec society. The Coalition Inclusion Quebec's founding principles state, a neutral state does not discriminate. The religious neutrality of the state is a core principle of the modern Quebec state. Religious neutrality demands that the state protect the freedom of all citizens without discrimination based on religion. Freedom of religion includes the freedom to practice one's religion. For some sincere believers, this may include wearing religious clothes or symbols. And no one should be denied employment in Quebec, even by the state, simply because of their religious practices, if they are otherwise qualified for the job.